okay? Kids do cost money. I am not disputing that whatsoever. Cost of kids. How much does it cost? So I went to the internet to look, and there were many different numbers. And so I just picked one. I picked Lending Tree. That's the website that I found these numbers from. I also looked at Visual Capitalist. They had a nice little map showing the average cost of a child by state. And so I'm going to go ahead and show both of those images in this video so you can see what I'm talking about. I'll go ahead and start with the Visual Capitalist picture first. So by state, we are looking at a wide variety of costs here. So if we're looking at the Midwest, we're looking at mostly mid-20,000s per year for a kid. And if you look down at the South, we're talking much cheaper cost of having a kid per year. Then, of course, if you look at the coasts, the West Coast and the East Coast, it is a little bit higher, getting toward that $30,000 mark. So I don't think that probably surprises too many people when they look at those numbers, that of course the lower cost of living places would happen to be cheaper and the higher cost of living places would just happen to be higher. But I thought I would at least show you that so you can kind of get an idea of what it looks like maybe in the place that you live. So then let's look at the Lending Tree chart here where they talk about the cost of having a kid in 2025 on average. So right now they're saying it costs about $29,000 per year for a child from birth all the way to about 18 years old. And that is a really high number. And I have some good news for you that maybe those of you that don't have kids that are maybe looking to have a kid and might be freaking out at that number right now, I have some good news for you. The good news is that these are averages. And in many cases, averages are skewed. They either can be skewed down or skewed up based on the spending habits of different people. The outliers can sometimes really pull that number one way or the other. So just because you see this average does not mean that it is going to be exactly that number for your personal situation. So looking at these different numbers here, let's go ahead and talk about each category and how you could potentially reduce that number or not see an increase in your spending at all. But before I do that, I do want to talk about one thing. Even though I am hitting at this idea that $29,000 is not what you're likely going to spend on your kid per year, that doesn't mean that kids are free, okay? Kids do cost money. I am not disputing that whatsoever. What I am disputing is this idea on the internet that children are so expensive that it's impossible to pay for them and I might as well not even have a kid at all. And that's the idea that I am attacking here. This idea that you can't afford a kid. You certainly can. You just have to live within your means and your lifestyle, and you can do it. And so let's go ahead and talk about that now. So let's go ahead and first talk about the very first category that they mention, which is rent. We can also throw in mortgage in here as well if you happen to own your home. So they're saying that when we compare two people who live together, married, we would assume, that have no kids, so DINKS is what the acronym is for that, or two people that are married that have 1 to 2 kids, there is a gap in cost in what they're paying, and that is where you see this number from. So this $1,000 in the rent category, that's supposed to be the gap between two people with no kids versus two people with kids. All right? So here's what I would say about that. If you are, say, DINKS, and you have a home already, there's a good chance that the home that you're sitting in is a 2-bed or 3-bed house with maybe 1 bathroom or 2 bathrooms. Now, for you, it may not feel like a massive house, but you have enough space for a kid or 2. My wife and I, we live in a 3-bed, 1-bath house with about 1,000 square feet. And we have 2 children, and it works out just fine. It is not this super cramped type feeling. It works out. It feels fine. And so when we started to have kids, we did not feel the need to upgrade our house. We just stayed in the house that we currently live in. So when it comes to the cost of our kids being born, our housing did not go up because we did not upgrade to a new house. So if you're in that situation where you have room to grow, then you don't need to upgrade. You can just stay where you're at, stay put, and this cost will never show up in your life situation. Now, of course, if you happen to be in a 1-bed, 1-bath situation or a 2-bed, 1-bath situation, then sure, you may want to consider upgrading at some point, and this cost will have an effect on you. But again, this is where life situations come in, right? Everyone's in a different situation. We can't take these averages as gospel here. All right, let's look at the next one then. The next one is food. Now this one I won't dispute with too much. I agree. Food costs will go up when you have kids. You will go up though based on the magnitude of your spending habits. Do you meal plan? Do you go to the store with a grocery list? If you are doing those things, you can see a decrease in that cost. Yes, your food budget will go up, but it won't go up astronomically if you are using these smart spending habits. So I mentioned in a previous video when we talked about lowering costs. When we got first married, it was just the 2 of us. It was about $200 a month for groceries. Then when Caspian came along, it got bumped up to about $300 slowly. It was about $250, then got to $300. Now that Ellery is here, it bumped up slowly. It went to $350. Now it's at $400 a month. Okay, so you can see the natural progression there. Now we never stopped meal planning. We never stopped using a grocery list and all those things. So the price could have been significantly more if we weren't using those spending habits. But even with those spending habits, it has gone up a little bit. So I won't dispute that number. Looking at the next one is daycare. Now daycare is an interesting one. They're looking at this at $17,836. So a couple things to point out here. First of all, you're not going to have your kid in daycare forever. So even though this is being counted toward your $29,000 per year, it's not until they're 18 years old. It's only for a period of time. And if you happen to be a couple that plans on having one of you stay home, then that's a cost you will never feel. Sure, you have the opportunity cost of foregoing work, right? You're not getting paid now for going out and working full time. But if you weren't working and making a ton of money to begin with, then staying at home would end up being a more cost-effective choice anyway. And again, the price of your child goes down by $17,000 according to that average. But even if you didn't do that and you decide to stay full time, that number is only for a period of time. Probably more likely to be for the first 3 years of your child's life, you'd be using daycare, maybe 4, because some states have free pre-K and free 4-year-old programs that maybe you could qualify for. And then that would essentially be your child's daycare while you are at work. So there are some opportunities out there. You just need to look at your own situation and see. But again, that's not a number that's going to stick with you all the way throughout. Let's look at the next one. The next one is clothing at $247. I'm not going to dispute that one either. Yeah, you're going to have to buy clothes for your kid. And that's not a really high number. That's not a back-breaking number. You should be able to accommodate that in your budget. If you can't, then you might need to look at your budget a little bit closer. Let's go on to the next one. Transportation. This one they're looking at $4,383, which is actually down from the 2023 number, which was $6,010. Couple things to point out here. Part of this number is influenced by your child turning 16, getting their driver's license, and getting a car. So that's where some of that price is coming in, which your kids are not going to be driving for a significant part of that life, of their early life. So you're not going to be paying that number until the last couple years, where your earnings are probably going to be much higher than where they were when you started having kids. The second thing where this number comes in, people feel the need to upgrade their cars when they start to have kids. But here's the thing. If you have only one child or two, you don't need to upgrade your car. Leave the car that you currently have. Buy some car seats, stick them in the car, and just use that car. If you continue to use the car that you always had before, then your costs don't go up in transportation when you start to have kids. And you won't start to see the transportation costs go up until the final couple years of their first 18 years of life. All right? So when we're looking at this number here, it's not going to be an instant hit. Unless, of course, you feel this need, this pressure to start buying bigger vehicles just because you have a kid. I have a coworker at the place that I work at right now. She had a child, and she went from the car she had to a minivan, like a brand new minivan, and then from that to an SUV. And guess what? She still only has one child in all of that. So who needs a third row vehicle if you've only got one kid? You don't necessarily need that much space unless, of course, you had 3 or 4 kids. She would have been perfectly fine with the first vehicle that she had. She could have just bought a car seat, stuck them in that car, and kept on driving and never saw an increase in her transportation costs. Now, of course, you may have to upgrade the vehicle eventually at some point, but that's the case for everybody. Whether you're a dink or you're a family with kids, it doesn't matter. You're going to eventually have to upgrade your vehicles because they're going to get old and used and all that stuff, and you're going to want to get something a little bit newer anyway. And at that point, you could start to consider a vehicle that has a third row if you even need it. We have 2 kids, and we have a Nissan Sentra and a Chevy Impala. Neither of those cars have third rows. Neither of those cars are very big, but we can fit 2 car seats into it, and it works out just fine. And we have not increased our transportation costs since our 2 kids are born. In fact, we don't have any car payments at all because we're debt-free, at least when it comes to our cars. So we haven't seen a dollar increase in transportation since having our kids. Because even if you start arguing gas, we're going wherever our kids are going. So it's not really like our kids are driving off somewhere. And if we're taking them to the groceries store, we were going to get groceries anyway, whether we had kids or didn't have kids. So again, it's neither here or there when it comes to those type of things if we're trying to calculate gas price increases and things like that. All right, let's look at the next couple of categories here. Insurance, I'm not going to argue that one because it is hard to shop around with that. A lot of people use employer insurance, stuff like that. So I don't disagree with that one at all. And so that leaves the last category is the child tax credit, which they have a negative number there because you actually get money from the government during tax filing season for that. So that actually reduces the overall cost that they have in their averages there. And then, of course, you see at the bottom there, the $29,419. So I really want the big takeaway from this to be that $29,000 number is not going to be your actual payment. A lot of this is dependent upon your lifestyle and the way you're living, and a lot of the increases are completely unnecessary. The car upgrades, completely unnecessary unless you have many kids. The house upgrade, depending on your living situation, it may be completely unnecessary, especially since many of us Americans feel like we need a massive house for the number of people we have. There are many people living in 4-bed, 2-bath, or 4-bed, 1-bath houses, and it's just 2 people living in those houses. Who needs 4 bedrooms if there's only 2 people living in it? So at that point, they have plenty of space to grow into that house and add children. So again, a lot of these different categories, as I pointed out, are just people feeling like they have to upgrade simply because they are bringing a child into the world without stopping to think, am I sufficient with what I already have? And in many cases, the answer is probably yes. The answer is probably yes. So if you're on the fence about having a kid and you've been looking at the internet and all the scary things out there talking about how expensive children are and all these things, I'm here to tell you that it is not true at all. It is completely dependent upon your lifestyle choices and your own living situations. You can reduce some of those numbers, and some of those numbers might be unavoidable. But it depends on you.